Germany's head of government, Chancellor Angela Merkel, is heading to South Africa. Merkel will begin a two-day visit on Thursday after welcoming ceremony at the Union Buildings in Pretoria. For more on the state visit, we are now joined by German Ambassador to South Africa, Martin Schafer, who joins us from our Pretoria studios. Good evening, Ambassador, and welcome to the Full View. What is on the top of the agenda with the arrival of the Chancellor?
Well, good evening, Eldrin. It's a visit of friends who, like South Africa, have come a long way, a long and winding road, I should like to say, to quote the Beatles, from a rather dark past to a bright future of freedom and democracy. And both South Africa and Germany, we carry responsibility beyond our borders, as South Africa will be chairing the African Union in a couple of days, and Germany will chair the European Union a little time after that, in the second half of 2020. So the two leaders, President Ramaphosa and the Chancellor, will have a lot to talk about world affairs, about holding the middle ground, about fighting to defend the multilateral, peaceful, rules-based world order on the one hand side. And on the other hand side, we are interested in fostering our bilateral ties, certainly in the area of trade and investment. And that is something we do need, and that is something also that South Africa does need, I believe.
According to the 72 other bilateral agreements that South Africa already has with Germany, one of those aspects that really stand out is on energy development cooperation. Would that also be one of the topics that will be part of the agenda in terms of the conversation that the Chancellor will be having with President Cyril Ramaphosa?
Well, the fact that a German word, the word Energiewende, change in energy matters in English, has become an international term, attests to the fact that the country I represent here in South Africa has been engaged in changing the way we produce energy and we consume energy for quite some time. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot that we can share. We have a history of our own coal production. Yeah. We have taken the decision to get rid of nuclear energy. We have taken the decision to phase out coal production for our energy needs. And I think that's, of course, one of the many topics for debate and dialogue between the two leaders and between the two countries.
Yeah. In the statement that was issued by the presidency, the presidency indicated that the partnership would also be strengthened this week in the engagement between the president as well as Chancellor Merkel, and indicating that one of the conversations will be around the United Nations Security Council. And I wonder where Germany stands with regards to this push that is on the continent. And I believe that even when the president takes over the chairmanship of the African Union, this is one aspect that he will be hammering on about, that there should be a permanent member of the Security Council that comes from the African continent.
Well, first of all, it's not the first time that South Africa and Germany share a non-permanent seat on the Security Council. In 2011 and 2012, so 8 years ago, it was exactly the same. And we have had a good cooperation then, and we have a very intensive, very trustful cooperation with South Africa on the United Nations Security Council last year, and we're going to have it this year too. There's a lot of dialogue we're going to have on issues such as Libya, for example, yeah, with the Berlin conference held in Berlin a couple of weeks ago. Now, to your concrete question. Of course, we feel in Germany that the composition of the United Nations Security Council, in particular the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, does not at all reflect the realities of the 21st century. It reflects the realities after the Second World War, not the 21st century. And we are very much in a favor of a reform. We feel that reform is urgent, and we feel that it needs to come with a result that represents the southern hemisphere, Africa and other parts of the world better than at present.
Yeah, but how do you get it to that level where it actually does materialize? And I remember having a conversation with the French ambassador to South Africa as well, and his argument was that when you look at what's currently happening on the continent, is although the continent is quite clear that there should be a permanent member that comes from Africa on the Security Council, there is no indication of which country that should be.
Well, we are part of a group that is called in New York the G4, countries that have been pushing for a reform of the United Nations at large and of the Security Council for quite some time. South Africa is not part of that group, but is also an aspiring country to play a bigger role on the international scene. Now, we do have the so-called Compromise of Isolini of about a dozen or more years ago, when there was at that time a big push for reform, and where in fact the African countries were agreed on something that at that moment was not implementable because there was a lack of majority. Because the idea was at the time that Africa would get 2 permanent seats on the Security Council, and there were more than 2 pretenders. So the African Union in Isolini wasn't able to agree on a reform. I do hope that now things might have changed, that South Africa, when taking the helm of the African Union, will make a push to look for a new majority, look for a new consensus within the African Union to push our joint agenda of a reform of the Security Council forward.
Ambassador, just quickly, you touched on the Libya issue and the Libya standoff that is currently in place, and of course there was an effort that was being made by Germany where that summit that took place, and we understand that the foreign ministers of various countries around Libya have now met in Germany. Do we know what the outcome of that meeting was?
Well, it was on a Sunday, now a little bit more than 2 weeks ago, when the Chancellor Merkel, who will arrive in South Africa very late tomorrow evening, invited a group of statesmen, in particular from those countries who we know had a concrete and direct involvement in Libyan affairs. The Russian president was there, the Turkish president was there, representatives from the Middle East were there, all countries, neighboring countries were there that have a say and believe that they need to have a say in Libya. And the agreement of Berlin was that we would leave the actors in Libya to find their own political compromises, to find their own way towards a peaceful and prosperous future, and to refrain from any foreign interference in Libya by the means of deliverance of weapons or by any other means. And indeed, we achieved an agreement and signatures by all those of which we know that they haven't done that in the past. Now, it's a stony road to peace in Libya since 2011. Everybody knows that. We will have hiccups on the way, but I think we have a firm document now that the international community has endorsed, including the African Union and their foreign ministers a couple of days ago in Brazzaville. And the Chancellor will come with her report on what happened in Berlin and will brief the South African president. And I believe that South Africa has an important role to play, not only as the future chair of the African Union, but also as a very important power on this continent that shares our values and our interests.
Ambassador, as we conclude this conversation, measures that have been put in place in Germany as the world battles the coronavirus. I saw a report earlier on, and I don't know whether you'll be able to confirm this, that there have been 12 confirmed cases in Germany.
I cannot confirm the number 12. I saw the media reports. We do have a number of cases of German nationals who have come from Wuhan and from the infected regions in China. As far as I know, there is not more than infections that are under perfect control. And you might have noticed that Germany sent an emergency airplane of the German Air Force to Wuhan in order to evacuate the round about 100 Germans just about a couple of days ago. That operation was successful. And we are now in the process of monitoring those that have come from Wuhan to make sure that they don't infect other people in Germany. And I do believe that the measures that have been taken by my country are sufficient exactly to contain the epidemic.
Ambassador, thank you so much for your time. That is Ambassador Martin Schafer, the German ambassador to South Africa, ahead of the state visit of Angela Merkel, who will be in the country on Thursday.